Le Sommet, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. The janitor walked in. Lucas Morgan, 52 years old, wearing his work uniform, keys jingling on his belt. The blonde at the center table smiled, amused. Two men at the nearby table laughed openly. Phones ready to record. It was the perfect prank. The company janitor invited to a fake blind date. To be publicly humiliated, they would record everything, post it, laugh at the Christmas party. But they didn't know. Lucas had already discovered everything. He'd overheard their planning. While cleaning the bathroom, he accepted the date anyway, because he had a story to tell, a lesson to teach. As he sat down, keys still jingling, he looked at the blonde, then at the two men, then back at her, and he began to speak. With the calmness of someone who had known pains far worse than humiliation, he took out a wrinkled photograph. A man in a white coat, surrounded by children, in a hospital room. The man was younger, but clearly him. 15 years ago, he wasn't a janitor. He was chief of pediatrics, New York Presbyterian Hospital, one of America's most respected pediatric surgeons. What he said next transformed laughter into tears. Because sometimes the people we consider invisible hold the most powerful stories. The janitor uniform, with the name Lucas embroidered on the pocket, clashed terribly in Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Keys jingled on his belt as Lucas Morgan walked through the dining room of Le Sommet, watched by diners with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. The blonde at the center table smiled with poorly disguised amusement, while two suited men at the neighboring table already laughed openly, their phones ready to record. They thought it was the perfect prank. The company janitor invited to a fake blind date to be publicly humiliated. They didn't know that Lucas had already discovered everything, and the words he spoke after sitting down, with the calmness of someone who had known pains far worse than humiliation, would transform laughter into tears of shame, because sometimes the people we consider invisible hold the most powerful stories. In the financial heart of Manhattan, among the skyscrapers of Midtown that scraped the New York sky, Lucas Morgan pushed his cleaning cart through the hallways of One Penn Plaza. 52 years marked on his face, 15 of which he had spent cleaning the offices of Sterling Consulting Group, a consulting giant where hundreds of ambitious young people built million-dollar careers. For most employees, Lucas was as invisible as the air they breathed. He entered the offices when they left. He cleaned their messes without complaining. He emptied trash cans filled with broken dreams and fulfilled ambitions. He was part of the furniture, necessary but ignored, like the ficus plants he watered every Monday. But Lucas saw everything. 15 years of invisibility had taught him to read people through what they left behind. The antidepressant pills hidden in drawers, the mascara-stained tissues in trash cans, the resignation letters written and then destroyed. He knew the secrets of that office better than anyone, although no one knew his. The cruelest group operated on the third floor, in the sales department. Matthew Sinclair, 32 years of arrogance packaged in $3,000 suits, led the pack. Alex Foster, his faithful sidekick, always ready to laugh at his cruel jokes. And the newcomer, Julia Roberts, 27 years of ambition sharp as a razor, beautiful in that cold way of someone who had learned to use beauty as a weapon for social climbing. It was a Wednesday in November when Lucas, hidden behind his cart in the third-floor bathroom, overheard the conversation that would change everything. Matthew and Alex were planning the epic prank for the company's Christmas video. Julia would pretend romantic interest in the janitor, invite him to dinner at Le Sommet, the city's most exclusive restaurant. They would record everything from a nearby table. The embarrassment, the inadequacy, the humiliation of a man out of place. The anticipated laughter of the two echoed in the bathroom as they imagined the scene. The janitor who wouldn't know which fork to use, who would sweat seeing the menu prices, who would realize he had been deceived. It would be the video of the year, they assured each other. The one that would make the entire company laugh at the Christmas party. Lucas remained motionless, his hand gripping the mop handle until his knuckles turned white. The smell of bleach filled his nostrils as he made a decision that would change not only his life, but that of everyone involved. He would let them proceed, but the lesson they would learn wouldn't be what they expected. During the following days, Julia began her performance. Studied smiles and casual hallway encounters, compliments on how he kept the office clean, small calculated attentions to seem like genuine interest. Lucas responded with his usual professional courtesy, pretending not to notice Matthew and Alex observing. amused from their desks. On Friday, while changing the trash bag in the break room, Julia approached with the performance of her life. She told him she found him interesting, that she admired his dedication, that perhaps they could have dinner together. Her voice trembled just enough to seem excited, eyes downcast to feign shyness. Lucas observed her with those brown eyes that had seen more than anyone in that office could imagine. He saw the falseness, saw Matthew filming secretly, saw the trap, and accepted the invitation with a smile they interpreted as embarrassed enthusiasm. Julia proposed Le Sommet for Saturday night, pretending it was a romantic surprise. Lucas accepted, knowing perfectly well what awaited him. But they didn't know what awaited them. Saturday night he prepared carefully in his small apartment in Queens. He didn't put on a suit he didn't own, didn't pretend to be someone he wasn't. He put on his clean and pressed work uniform, polished his safety shoes, carefully combed his gray hair, and put 2 things in his pocket that he would take out at just the right moment: a photograph and a letter. Lucas's entrance into Le Sommet was exactly as Matthew and Alex had imagined. The maitre d' looked at him perplexed. Some customers laughed quietly. The janitor uniform clashed like an oil stain on a wedding dress among the crystal chandeliers and finest linen tablecloths. Julia waited for him at the center table, splendid in a black dress that cost more than Lucas earned in 3 months. When she saw him in his uniform, for a moment, the studied smile wavered. She hadn't expected him to arrive like this, without even trying to dress decently. This made the joke even crueler, and, in her distorted mind, funnier. Matthew and Alex, strategically seated 2 tables away, already laughed without even trying to hide. Their phones were positioned to capture every angle of the scene. Other office colleagues were scattered throughout the restaurant, all accomplices to what they believed would be the most hilarious moment of the year. Lucas sat down calmly, keys jingling as he settled into the chair. He looked at Julia, then at Matthew and Alex, then back at Julia, and began to speak with a voice that came from depths none of them had ever explored. He said he knew about the prank. He had heard everything while cleaning the bathroom, but he had accepted to come because he had a story to tell. A story that might teach them that the uniform one wears doesn't define who one is. He took the wrinkled photograph from his pocket. The image showed a man in a white coat, surrounded by children in a hospital room. The man was younger, without gray hair, but clearly recognizable as Lucas. Silence fell over the restaurant like a heavy blanket as Lucas told of his previous life. 15 years ago, he was chief of pediatrics at New York Presbyterian Hospital, one of the most respected pediatric surgeons in America, specialized in congenital heart malformations. He had saved hundreds of lives, published innovative research, given lectures around the world. Then came that December night that shattered his existence. Sophia, his 16-year-old daughter, the only family he had left after his wife died of cancer, was returning from a party. The car was hit by a drunk driver. Sophia arrived at the emergency room of his own hospital in critical condition. Lucas's voice barely trembled as he described how he had attempted the impossible, operating on his own daughter despite protocols prohibiting it. The hands that had saved hundreds of children trembled as they tried to save the only life that mattered more than his own. Sophia died in the operating room at 3:47 a.m., while snow fell silently over New York City. The restaurant had become a cathedral of silence. Waiters had stopped. Customers at nearby tables listened motionless. Julia had the napkin clutched in her hands, bright eyes she didn't dare raise. Matthew and Alex had lowered their phones. Amusement transformed into horror. Lucas continued, telling of the collapse that followed, the depression that devoured him like cancer of the soul, the alcohol that became the only anesthetic for unbearable pain, the medical errors that began to accumulate. The hospital tried to help him, but finally was forced to suspend him. He lost his medical license. He sold the house to pay for treatments. He hit rock bottom in an abyss from which he didn't believe he could emerge. The janitor job at Sterling was his lifeline. A humble but honest job that gave him routine, purpose, dignity. Every mopped floor was a small victory against inner chaos. Every sober day, a conquest against demons. Then he took the letter from his pocket. It was from Mrs. Chen from administration, thanking Lucas for having saved her son's life. The boy needed urgent heart surgery. Lucas could no longer operate, but he had used all his contacts to find a surgeon in Boston willing to intervene for free. He explained that this was just one of many people he had helped in silence, using his residual medical knowledge to advise, console, direct. He did it without seeking recognition, because he had learned that a person's value isn't in their title, but in the good they do. Julia stood up from the table and ran toward the bathroom, her face streaked with tears. Matthew and Alex remained petrified, crushed by the weight of their cruelty. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Lucas stood and approached their table without anger, with the same sad calmness. He told them he understood the need to feel superior. He too had once looked at the world from atop his white coat, but life had taught him that we're all one step away from catastrophe, that the line between who serves and who is served is as thin as tissue paper. On Monday morning, Sterling Consulting Group was wrapped in an atmosphere as dense as Manhattan fog. The story of Saturday night had spread like wildfire, but not as a comic video. It had become a whispered confession of collective shame. Lucas arrived at work at 5:30 a.m. as always, finding letters of apology on every desk. Dozens of people who for years had ignored him now asked for forgiveness. Mrs. Chen had left homemade cookies with a note calling him guardian angel. Others had left small gifts, words of thanks for kindnesses never before noticed. Julia didn't show up to work for 3 days. When she returned, she was transformed. Arrogance replaced by humility. Expensive suits by simple clothes. She approached Lucas while he was cleaning, and with a broken voice apologized not only for the prank, but for having lived an entire life judging people by their status. She confessed to having grown up in a family where value was measured only in material success, where compassion was seen as weakness. Lucas listened. Then he did something unexpected. He put a hand on her shoulder, telling her that everyone deserves a second chance. What mattered was having understood and using this lesson to be better. The company management, learning of the incident. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video, called An Extraordinary Assembly. The CEO spoke with cold anger about cruelty toward the humblest employees, about how a company that tolerates such behavior is destined for moral failure. Matthew was demoted from manager to junior salesman. Alex was transferred to the Chicago branch. Both were required to volunteer at a soup kitchen. But the worst punishment was internal. Matthew couldn't sleep, tormented by the memory of Lucas talking about his daughter while he laughed. Alex developed panic attacks. The cruelty zone had transformed into guilt that consumed them. Meanwhile, something extraordinary began to happen. People started to really see Lucas, not as the invisible janitor, but as Dr. Morgan, the man who had lost everything and still found the strength to get up every morning. Employees began greeting him by name, asking for advice, including him. 3 weeks later, the board of directors offered Lucas a new role, corporate wellness coordinator. He would no longer clean, but would be a reference point for employees in difficulty. He would organize solidarity initiatives. He would be the company's moral conscience. Lucas reread the offer letter next to Sophia's photo that he always carried with him. He smiled, the first real smile in years. His daughter would be proud. He accepted. 6 months after that night at Le Sommet, Sterling Consulting Group was a profoundly changed place. The janitor incident had shaken the foundations of corporate culture, forcing everyone to confront their own humanity. Lucas had transformed his new role into a mission. He created a listening service for employees in difficulty. He organized fundraisers for the pediatric hospital where he had worked. He instituted weekly corporate kindness initiatives. His small, windowless office became a refuge for those who needed comfort or advice. Julia underwent the most radical transformation. The superficial, ambitious girl discovered that her life had been an empty performance. She asked Lucas if she could help him in his work voluntarily, to learn what it really meant to serve others. Together, they created mentorship programs, emergency funds for employees in difficulty, transforming the cold corporate culture into something more human. Matthew Sinclair initially struggled to adapt to his new reality. The fall from successful manager to junior salesman was devastating to his ego, but it was precisely in that forced solitude that he began to see what he had previously ignored. His identity, built entirely on feeling superior to others, was a house of cards. One day, during a solitary lunch, Lucas sat next to him. Without preamble, he told him about his own collapse after Sophia's death, about how wounded pride was nothing compared to loss of soul. He suggested using this fall as an opportunity to rebuild on more solid foundations. Matthew listened and, for the first time in his life, asked for help. Alex, exiled in Chicago, discovered away from the toxic environment a version of himself he had suppressed. The forced volunteering at the soup kitchen transformed into vocation. He discovered he had a natural talent for listening, for consoling those who had lost everything. He wrote Lucas a long letter of gratitude for the lesson that had changed his life. One day, Lucas received a call from the medical board, not to return his license, but to invite him to speak at a conference on burnout and trauma management in medical personnel. Initially, he refused, terrified of returning to that world. But it was little Chen, the boy he had helped operate on, who convinced him, telling him his story could save other doctors from collapse. The conference was an unexpected triumph. Lucas spoke with a broken voice about the unbearable weight of having lives in one's hands, about the thin line between omnipotence and impotence. The standing ovation wasn't for the brilliant surgeon he had been, but for the man who had found dignity even after losing everything. 1 year after that night at Le Sommet, the first edition of the Sophia Morgan Award for Corporate Kindness was celebrated in Sterling's conference room. The room was packed not only with employees, but with representatives from other companies, journalists, municipal authorities. When it was announced that the award went to Julia Roberts, many were surprised. The girl who had orchestrated the cruel prank now went up on stage transformed. In her speech, she told with a trembling voice about the journey from humiliation to redemption, how that night had forced her to look in the mirror and not recognize herself. She spoke of working with Lucas, of the lives she had touched, of how she had learned that true success is measured in kindness, not in followers or bonuses. After the ceremony, Matthew approached Lucas. He had changed physically, arrogance replaced by a simplicity that paradoxically made him more charismatic. He talked about his therapeutic process, about how he had discovered that his cruelty was born from a childhood where love was conditional on success. Now he worked with troubled teenagers, teaching them that personal worth doesn't depend on results, but on choices. He asked Lucas for forgiveness, who responded that forgiveness is conquered with actions, shaking his hand in a gesture that for Matthew meant rebirth. Alex returned from Chicago for the event. He had found peace in the smaller city. He had started a relationship with a volunteer from the soup kitchen. He was studying to be a counselor. He showed Lucas a photo of himself serving meals to homeless people, saying it was worth more than all the photos of business success he had posted. The most moving moment came when Matthew's mother approached Lucas. With tears in her eyes, she thanked him for having saved her son. She told how after the incident she had seen Matthew collapse and then be reborn more human, more true. She thanked him for having done with grace what years of family criticism had not achieved. That night, Lucas returned to his small apartment. He sat in front of Sophia's photo and told her about the day, about the award in her name, about the changed people, about the good born from evil. Then he took a letter from the drawer from New York Presbyterian. They were inviting him to return as a consultant for psychological support to families. It wouldn't be a return to the past, but a step toward a future where his pain could become comfort for others. He accepted. Sophia would be proud. 5 years after that night at Le Sommet, New York City was covered by an early snowfall. Lucas walked toward New York Presbyterian with steady steps. He had become the doctor of the soul, as families in the pediatric department called him. He no longer operated but still saved lives, consoling terrified parents, supporting doctors on the brink of burnout, being the bridge between medicine and humanity. That morning he had a special appointment. Julia, now married to a teacher she met during volunteer work, was pregnant, and the ultrasound had revealed a heart malformation in the fetus. Lucas consoled her not only with medical expertise, but with the empathy of someone who had known that fear. Julia told him that if it was a girl, she would name her Sophia. In the afternoon, he received Matthew, now director of a foundation for executives with burnout, who wanted collaboration for seminars on resilience. Alex participated by video call from Chicago, where he had opened a listening center that had become a national model. That night, there was a dinner at a simple tavern. Around the table sat people who 5 years earlier would never have imagined being together. There was Mrs. Chen with her son, who wanted to study medicine inspired by Lucas. There were former colleagues transformed by the experience. There was living proof that good can come from evil. Lucas stood for a toast. He spoke of how pain can become compassion, humiliation into humility, cruelty into a catalyst for kindness. He paradoxically thanked those who had organized the prank, because without that initial cruelty, no one would be who they were now. As glasses clinked and snow fell outside, Julia showed the ultrasound of her baby. The malformed heart beat strong. It would be operated on by the team Lucas had trained, his medical legacy continuing. Lucas looked at that small life and saw proof that nothing truly ends. Our actions create ripples that spread, transforming lives. The cruel prank had generated a wave of change that still expanded. 10 years later, when Lucas died peacefully in his sleep, a letter was found at his desk. It was addressed to those who had the courage to change and contained his last lesson: the importance of seeing humanity in every person, regardless of the uniform they wear. The transformative power of truth spoken with kindness. The certainty that every act of cruelty can become an opportunity for growth. Every shame can transform into wisdom. His wish was that the Sophia Foundation continue reminding the world that behind every role is a human being with a story that deserves respect. More than 1,000 people attended the funeral, surgeons and janitors, CEOs and homeless people, all united in memory of a man who had transformed tragedy into a lesson of humanity. On the coffin, someone had placed a mop and a stethoscope intertwined, the perfect symbol of a life that had demonstrated that it's not what you do that defines you, but how you do it, and with how much love. The story continues to be told in companies, schools, families, a reminder that kindness is a choice, that respect is owed to all, that the deepest lessons often come from those we've always ignored. And in that always hurried New York City, from time to time someone stops, looks into the eyes of the person cleaning, and says simply, "Thank you for your work. What's your name?" It's a small gesture that changes the world, one kindness at a time. Lucas Morgan's legacy lives in every act of respect toward those we consider invisible. His story reminds us that we won't be judged by our titles or successes, but by how we treat those who can do nothing for us. And that the true measure of a person isn't how high they've climbed, but how many people they've helped lift up along the way. The circle had closed, but the spiral of kindness he initiated continues today in every office where someone stops to truly know the person cleaning the floors. In every moment when we choose to see humanity instead of role. In every second chance we offer someone who has made a mistake. Because this is Lucas Morgan's true lesson. We all wear different uniforms, but underneath we're equally fragile, equally in need of respect and connection. And sometimes the angel we seek wears a work uniform and pushes a cleaning cart, guarding secrets and wisdom that could change our lives, if only we had the humility to listen. Like if you believe every person deserves respect regardless of their job. Comment a moment when you judged someone by their appearance and were wrong. Share to remind everyone that kindness can change lives. Subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and open the eyes. Because in the end, we won't be remembered for our titles or our successes, but for how we treated those who could do nothing for us. And the true measure of a person isn't how high they've climbed, but how many people they've helped lift up along the way.